In this video, I'm going to be working through some class data. This is our fall 2021 class survey data. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about data cleaning. So this is not a very comprehensive discussion about data cleaning. We're using a very manageable data set, doing this in Excel, but hopefully kind of these principles of why we do data cleaning and just some of the subjectivity and decision making that goes into data cleaning and how we think about it. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is just the raw data set. I haven't really done anything to it. I deleted one extra column and then did some very minor adjustments. But for the most part, this is really what the data looks like when I kind of download it here. And so what I'm going to start by doing is just unwrapping the text, just because some of these columns are rather take up a lot of space. So I'm just going to click this kind of the wrap text button and just unwrap it so that everything is just kind of easy to see. None of the really long strings of text are taking up a lot of space. I'm also going to just make a couple of these a little bit bigger by just double clicking them. That might actually be a little bit too big because that's probably trying to grab the whole kind of column title there. So I'll kind of do this for a couple. You'll also notice with the salary variable that a couple of these you might see like this one, for example. There's too many digits to really fit in this particular space. So again, if we just expand that out, we'll be able to see all of that as well. So the first thing I'm going to talk about with regard to data cleaning is cleaning up the numeric variables. So you'll notice that a couple of these numeric cells, somebody or several people included units. So for example, 129 miles. So if we want to import this into R, we want to get rid of those because we want these to appear as true numeric columns. And if there's any characters in there, there's any of your letters or symbols, R isn't going to think that this is a truly numeric column. So instead what we're going to do is just change that to just the number for any of these. And hopefully when we're done, we'll have a full set of numbers only in here. You'll also notice that it's not as simple as just fixing the unit. So this person, for example, said Champaign with regard to how many miles away from Champaign is home for you. Well, if you live in Champaign, then that's kind of a confusing question. So they just said Champaign. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to put a 0 in this cell instead. I think that's a fair kind of decision to make. That's a fair judgment call that we can just say that there's 0 miles from Champaign. So that's a pretty straightforward choice, but you might, get a couple like approximately 134 miles. I suppose we could just change that to 134. But, you're going to have to do your best to kind of work through these. So here's a less than 500 miles, right? So that's not a super clear choice. And so in some of these cases, what we might need to do is just delete the cell. So in cases where the response is just a little too unclear, you don't feel comfortable making a judgment call, we're just going to delete that and just treat it as missing data because we don't feel comfortable maybe inserting a data value without follow-up there. I'll also mention that some people might write their answer in words. So I think, for example, here, somebody said 1 and none. So I think it's fair for us to just change this to 1 and 0. And again, we're doing this because we want R to read these as numeric variables. So if it sees the character entries, it's going to be confused and it's not going to treat these as numeric variables in R. Some other things, you might see people saying ranges. Like I know for this variable over here, I asked a question about how many videos would you want 2 hours of lecture content split up over. So some people gave some kind of non-committal answers like 4 or 5. You'll see there's a 3 or 4. I'm going to talk about this date in just a second. Or they might have used a hyphen like 2 to 3. Right, so we need to make a judgment call. We need to be consistent with how we're going to report these. So one option is we could just choose whatever the first number is. Or if they give a range where we can pick a number in the middle. So if it's 4 or 5, maybe we shouldn't say 4.5 because it's kind of a weird entry. But if they said 4 to 6, I think we could reasonably say 5. As long as we're just being consistent how we want to report these, Optionally, we could just clear these references as well and just say they're not clear entries. But at the same time, it's nice to preserve the data if we can. So if we feel like it's a relatively safe judgment call to make, we can just come up with a kind of a method for how we're going to convert those. But again, that's going to be kind of up to you. I also want to talk about these dates. So you might be wondering, how does February 4th show up as an entry? And that's because Excel has some automatic formatting. So if I were to do 2-4, R might automatically convert that to a date. Same with really any kind of, um, you know, hyphen entry like that. So if you see a date, just kind of backtrack and think what range they were probably saying. So February 4th is probably 2 to 4. And we can then kind of replace that entry accordingly with how we would be doing these normally. I also want to mention that if you see any really extreme values, something that's just, really high or maybe doesn't seem super sensible, we don't have to change that here. So data cleaning is really just making the data work for importing into a software for analysis. I mean, I don't know if I see a super unusual one, but like that, we saw that entry down here somewhere. Let's see if I can find it. It was the long one. So like, okay, someone said $100 million. Okay, so we could question that and say, is that really a rational answer? But at the same time, this is not going to be a problem. We're not going to get an error in R if we try to import this. R is going to be able to read this. So we don't have to delete those or do anything with those. We can just leave the data as it is, and then at a later time in analysis stage, we can decide if we want to kind of remove or filter out some of these more extreme values. So that's pretty much everything we need for the numeric. And same thing for symbols, by the way. So, if you see any besides the words and units, but the symbols should probably be filtered out as well. But I do want to say something about the categorical variables as well. So now several of these, they only had multiple choice answers like yes, no, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Here is an answer box, though, where there was an other option where people could write in an answer if they felt like the provided answers didn't quite fit their preference. So you do want to check these to see if anybody else did write anything. And then we can decide if we want to categorize that into fitting one of these other choices. If we think like, well, that really fits this other choice that we did offer, maybe they just misunderstood. Or we could also just create a new category. What we don't want is something like this, right? So, this is kind of a unique entry. So maybe we can decide what we want to call this and also just be consistent if there's any other kind of custom answers here that we can give a short, concise answer for. Kind of the same story over here with the musician one, but you don't actually have to fix this just because it's going to be a little bit complex. But I do want to mention here that these entries are going to be case sensitive if we're posting or uploading this into R. So for example, we have two folks who said Post Malone. One capitalized it, one didn't. So R might read these, in fact, I think it will read these as two kind of separate entries, as two separate answers. So if we really wanted to clean this, we'd want to clean this up so that we have consistent capital letters, so that any clearly same artist is being kind of recorded the same way with the same number of spaces and capitals and everything. I might do this at a later time, but we won't necessarily worry about this for the lab that we're doing this. The last thing I'll mention is that the nature of this data allowed people to submit more than once. And so if I think about the context, people had to get a code at the end after they submitted to get points. And I know people took the survey and didn't remember to check, so they had to basically go through it again. So that's why we have a couple of these kind of empty entries or almost empty entries where maybe that's why folks were going through it. But more concerning or more kind of difficult is when people filled out all their answers again. So it's not going to be immediately obvious when there's a duplicate. So I'm just going to let you know how I kind of address that is I just take the most unique variable we have, which is the musician one, and then maybe by a couple others as well, and basically go through to see if I kind of identify some either duplicate or really closely duplicate rows. And then I'm just going to clear those before I kind of post this. So the data sheet that you're going to get will have as many duplicate rows deleted as I can find. I can't guarantee I'll catch all of them, but hopefully we'll have pretty much all unique row entries there.